So why do most startups fail? I mean, think about it. They've got brilliant ideas, super passionate teams, sometimes even a ton of funding. So what gives? What goes wrong? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. We're exploring The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, a book that totally flipped the script on how to build a business by tackling that exact question. You know this story. It's the one we've all heard a million times. Brilliant college kids sitting in a dorm room, basically inventing the future. It's that classic rags to riches tale that just fuels this whole startup myth, right? It's exciting, it's romantic, and it makes success feel like it's just meant to be, as long as you have that right stuff. But here's the thing. According to Eric Ries, this story isn't just a myth. It's actually a really dangerous one.
Yeah, because the reality, it's brutally different. That whole unicorn myth is super powerful for sure, but the actual data tells a much, much harsher story. The truth is, most new businesses just fail. And you know what? It's almost never because people aren't working hard enough. The real problem is that this whole idea of a lone genius with a brilliant idea that's just destined for success, it's just not true. It's a myth.
And let me tell you, Eric Ries learned this the hard way. He talks about this really painful experience with his first company. I mean, they had it all, a great product, a brilliant team, and what they were so sure was the right idea. But they still failed. And that's when he had this big realization. All those popular success stories you read in magazines, they're basically lies. Not because they're made up, but because they skip the most important parts. So that failure, it forced him to ask the single most important question any entrepreneur could ever ask. Why? Just why? What is the actual root cause of this? Why do so many well-funded, incredibly hardworking startups just end up going nowhere? And here's the answer he came up with. It's the core insight of the whole book. The biggest reason startups fail isn't because of a bad product or a weak team or anything like that. It's the just tremendous waste. All that time, all that money, all that passion, wasted on perfectly executing a plan to build something that in the end, nobody actually wanted. Okay, so if the old way is clearly broken, then what's the alternative? This is where Ries proposes a totally new way of thinking. It's not just a few tips and tricks. It's a rigorous, almost scientific method for dealing with the intense uncertainty that comes with any new venture. So first things first, we've got to redefine what we even mean by startup. Because it's not just some tech company in a garage, right? The lean startup definition is much broader. It's any human institution, whether that's inside a huge company, a government agency, or a nonprofit, that's designed to create a new product or service under conditions of, and this is the key part, extreme uncertainty. And that leads us to this absolutely crucial mindset shift. Your primary goal as a startup isn't to build a product. It's not to make stuff. Your goal is to learn. The real challenge, the whole game, is to figure out what product actually needs to be built to create a sustainable business. And you need to learn that lesson as fast as you possibly can. So how do you do that? Well, the engine that drives all this learning is a really simple but powerful feedback loop. Build, measure, and learn. It's this constant cycle. You build an idea into some kind of product, you measure how actual customers respond to it, and then you learn from that data whether you should keep going or make a big change. All right, let's break that loop down piece by piece. We'll start with the build phase. Now, the key here is not to go off and build your grand, perfect vision right away. No way. The idea is to start with something called a minimum viable product, or an MVP for short. And listen, an MVP is not just a smaller version of your final product with fewer features. That is a super common mistake people make. Its one and only purpose is to kickstart that learning process. I want you to think of it like a science experiment. It's designed to test your single biggest, most critical assumption, even if the experiment itself feels kind of embarrassingly simple. And when I say simple, I mean it. Some of these first MVPs are kind of mind-blowing. Groupon? It started as just a simple WordPress blog where they would manually email PDFs to people. Dropbox didn't even have a working product. Their MVP was just a 3-minute demo video showing how the product would work. See, they weren't testing the tech, they were testing the single most important question. Does anyone even want this? Okay, so you've built your MVP, it's out in the wild. Now we move to the next part of the loop, measure. But here's the catch. You have to be measuring the right things. And this is where Ries brings in this really cool idea called innovation accounting, which is basically a whole new way of tracking progress that's built specifically for startups. And he makes this absolutely critical distinction between two types of metrics, vanity metrics and actionable metrics.
Now, vanity metrics are the ones that look great on paper, right? Things like total registered users or total downloads. They make you feel good, they look great in a presentation, but they don't actually tell you if you're making real progress. Actionable metrics, on the other hand, show you clear cause and effect. They connect what you did to what customers did.
One of the best tools for this is something called cohort analysis. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Instead of just looking at all your users in one giant blob, you track them in groups or cohorts based on when they signed up. So you can ask questions like, hey, did the people who joined in March, right after we launched that new feature, did they act differently than the people from February? See? This is how you prove cause and effect. And that is the only way to get real, validated learning.
Okay, so all this measuring, all this data, it all leads up to the final, and honestly, the most critical step in the entire loop: learn. This is the moment of truth. This is where you have to take a deep breath and make a hard, evidence-based decision about the future of your whole company.
So what do? What happens when those actionable metrics just aren't moving up? When every experiment you run seems to prove that your core strategy is just wrong? Like I said, this is the moment of truth that every single startup will face.
Basically, the data gives you two choices. You can either persevere, meaning you stick with the current plan because the numbers show you're onto something, or you pivot. And a pivot is not hitting the panic button. It is not an admission of failure. It's a strategic, structured course correction. It's about keeping one foot planted in what you've already learned, while you move the other foot to test a new, fundamental hypothesis about your business.
And you know what? This ability to pivot is what gives a startup its real superpower. It's the escape hatch that saves companies from becoming what Rees calls the living dead. And you've seen these companies, right? They're not exactly failing, but they're not really growing either. They're just stuck, burning through time and money on a road to nowhere.
So when you put all of these pieces together, you've got the build, measure, learn loop, you've got the MVP, you've got innovation accounting, and you've got the pivot. What you end up with is a really powerful new way of looking at the world of business.
And really, the big message here is that entrepreneurship is not magic. It's not some mystical art form that only a few special visionaries can do. It is a form of management. It's a scientific process for navigating extreme uncertainty, and it's a process that anyone can learn and anyone can apply.
Rees even suggests that being an entrepreneur is only like 5% about having the big idea. The other 95%? That's the gritty, unglamorous, day-in, day-out work of just grinding through that build, measure, learn loop over and over and over again.
At the end of the day, the lean startup really forces us to completely redefine what success even means. Success isn't about how many features you ship or how busy you are. It's about how much you learn. Because, like Rise says, success is not delivering a feature. Success is learning how to solve the customer's problem.
And that leaves all of us with a final, pretty challenging question. It doesn't matter if you're in a tiny startup or a massive organization. Think about this. What is the single biggest leap of faith assumption that your work, your project, your company is resting on right now? And even more importantly, what's the fastest, cheapest, simplest experiment you could run, maybe even this week, to find out if you're right?